Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Dana Gibbs. Today, I am going to record for you guys a rebroadcast of the talk that I gave to EAA 661, the Denton chapter, on April 6, 2024. So this talk is about hormones and how they can affect and complicate you having your FAA medical certificate. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by sharing my screen, and we'll just move right into it. So here we go. All right. So hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to present to you today at EAA 661. I am so excited to be here. I am very apologetic that the original recording did not work out, so this is a rebroadcast. I am Dr. Dana Gibbs. I am a private pilot, and I own a Swift, a Globe Swift. I'm also a former ear, nose, and throat physician and surgeon turned thyroid and hormone specialist. And I help people find their way back to wellness who have hormone problems. And what I want to talk about to you guys today is to show you what hormones do in your body and how stress can change your hormones and adversely affect your health, including several ways that stress can actually cause you to lose your FAA medical certificate. So then I'm going to give you some tools that you can use to optimize your ability to handle stress and handle some of the complications of that. So here we go. So this content is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only, and does not create a physician-patient relationship between you and me. So if you have a medical condition that you need help with, please do not delay in seeking medical care for that from your personal physician. All right, so I'm going to start with a story. So there was once a girl that wanted to be a pilot. She also wanted to be a doctor more than anything, but poor health and poor stamina nearly stopped her from achieving those dreams. She was frequently sick and was treated for many sinus infections, including having sinus surgery as early as high school, but many more times after that. During medical school, she would get faint on rounds or during surgeries and nearly pass out. And she was given medication for depression that didn't help. She was always exhausted, but didn't sleep well. And she was frequently feeling too anxious to fall asleep at night, even though she needed more sleep. She had low thyroid symptoms, but because she wasn't overweight and her blood tests were fine, no doctor ever diagnosed anything. So this is a hormone story. And at this point, in the story, she had given up on becoming a pilot because medicine, unfortunately, is and was not great at helping people manage these more subtle hormone disorders. And of course, this is just the start of the story. So there are 6 hormones that we're going to discuss today. And what are hormones? What are hormones even for? Well, they are the chemical messengers that are produced by endocrine glands in your bodies. And without hormones, we would quickly die because they control our metabolism and many, many other processes in our bodies, as you will see. So these first 3, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, are the ones that everybody thinks about. And they are important, but their role is pretty small compared to these last 2, insulin and cortisol. And also, thyroid is a hormone. It drives many metabolic processes in our body, and many people who have hormone problems blame their thyroid for all of it, when these last 2 are actually far more likely to be a major part of their problem. I'm not discounting thyroid, but if that's all you focus on, your results may not be what you're hoping for. So insulin is energy utilization in our bodies. It helps us process sugar, but it has many, many other effects in our bodies as well. Cortisol is the foundation hormone. It is the master of all the others, and we have total control over what happens with these 2 through our lifestyle choices for the most part. And we need to talk about cortisol first. So cortisol comes from your adrenal glands, and Cortisol and the cholesterol-based hormones come from right here, these little caps that are on the top of your kidneys, and they secrete hormones inside your bloodstream because they are endocrine glands. The two layers of the adrenal glands produce two kinds of chemicals, neurotransmitters and hormones. And the most important hormone that the adrenal gland makes is cortisol, but it's not the only one. And because all the adrenal hormones are made from cholesterol, we call them sterol or steroid hormones. So cortisol, what does cortisol do? Aside from being the master hormone, it has many beneficial functions. It helps us stay alert and focused during the day, allowing us to tackle whatever situation is at hand more effectively. It plays a huge role in regulating our sleep and wake cycle by cycling up and down through the day and night. It regulates our metabolism. So in response to injuries or infection, it helps reduce inflammation and swelling in our bodies. This can aid in the healing process and protect us against further damage. But cortisol is the stress hormone. It helps us route energy to functions that help us survive during stress. Cortisol is rapidly released as a part of that acute stress reaction, and it raises your blood sugar by causing it to be rapidly dumped out of your liver to provide energy to our brain and to our muscles. It also prevents it from being sucked up by non-essential functions by triggering something called insulin resistance. It also enables us to be focused and alert to danger from these life-threatening events by raising what's known as sympathetic tone. It also shuts off functions that are essential for our immediate survival, like digestion, reproduction, and growth. Think hair and nails. And it also slows down healing and immune surveillance. But cortisol isn't inherently bad. It's necessary for our life. So people who don't have cortisol in their bodies or don't make it will drop dead running to catch a flight or during a major surgery because their blood sugar will drop too low to sustain their life. So what is stress? What do we mean by stress, and what kinds of stress are there? So stress is anything that our primitive brain sees as a threat to our survival. So early in human history, when we were not at the top of the food chain, our bodies evolved to handle stress. So there's acute stress, like running from the tiger. That's the cliche, the typically discussed example. But there was also more chronic stress, like food scarcity, war, slavery, being exiled. They might not kill you right now, but they're definitely a threat to your survival. So when stress arises, our bodies react in a predictable physical way by releasing first adrenaline and then cortisol, which raises our blood sugar. And the more prolonged the stress is, the more pronounced and persistent that physical hormone reaction becomes. Because we needed to be able to do sustained hard physical work like hunting or conserve energy to get away from danger and to find food and to stay in the good graces of our tribe members. So this term adaptive means it helps us survive. And short-term cortisol is definitely adaptive. So this starts with a thought. For example, the tiger is after me, I might die, which triggers an emotion in your brain, fear. And the emotion signals the release of the factors that cause the release of the adrenaline and cortisol. So when the adrenaline hits your bloodstream, it gives you instant energy to act, to run if you can, or to fight if you have to. And it happens very, very quickly. The adrenaline is within fractions of a second, and then cortisol within 30 seconds. And once that happens, it can take several hours to days after the event is past for the levels of those hormones and the heightened vigilance and the anxiety to go back down to normal again. So what are more modern causes of stress? So stress can come in three ways. It can be external, like physical danger, like a car wreck or a near miss on the freeway. But it can also be physical, like pain or malnutrition. Think calorie restricted dieting, for example. Inflammation, illness, lack of sleep, or even overexercising. And then the third kind of stress is situational, modern first world circumstances like the economy or our kids, our relationships, even public speaking. Um, and it's how we think about these situations that causes the same physical stress reaction in our bodies, exactly the same as if we were actually in danger of dying. Here's another thing. We humans are the only species that have evolved the ability to worry about things that we can't control or that we imagine even before they happen. So, chronic thoughts about what if I get cancer? What if I can't pay my bills? What if you guys don't like me? These imagined bad outcomes are indistinguishable to our brain from the actual event. And the stress reaction that happens in our bodies is exactly the same. So here's how this works. So the modern day stress comes from our thoughts about the circumstances, and those circumstances that result in those kind of thoughts produce these 5 emotions: sadness, disgust, anger, shame, fear, and disgust so we don't eat spoiled or poisonous things. So these 5 emotions go to a different part of our brain and trigger our survival instincts by releasing cortisol and adrenaline here at the base of our brain. And they release factors or signaling hormones that go to our endocrine glands. So we're just going to look at the cortisol for a second, because what happens is the thoughts come in, the emotions come in, the hypothalamus and the pituitary start releasing these controlling factors like adrenocorticotropic hormone, which then circulate through our blood to the adrenals to release the cortisol. So, for example, if I were to think, wow, you people in the audience are being really quiet, you must hate my presentation, then I would have very different emotions than if I think, wow, they're being very quiet. They must really be into what I'm telling them. So I don't release the cortisol unless I have the negative emotion that causes me to release the hormones that signal the cortisol in the situational stress, even when that situation is exactly the same. So the hypothalamus responds to the emotions by signaling the pituitary gland to release a burst of this ACTH, which then travels through our blood. And of course, there's other factors that also influence the particular amount of ACTH that we're making at any given time, including the time of day and the feedback loop from cortisol and from other hormones as well that affect cortisol. So this whole system is called the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis. So drilling down, these signal hormones go out to the rest of the adrenal glands and tell them to get to work. And it's not just cortisol. This system works to control a large list of hormone systems like growth hormone, FSH and LH, TSH, prolactin, and several others. And under normal circumstances, things stay in balance and all is well. But now let's look what happens when you add stress to the system. So some problems with modern stress, beyond the fact that we frequently create it for ourselves, are these. It's generally not just a once every few weeks kind of a thing. Usually it's a pattern, a daily grind, even a habit like being late, for example. And it can actually hijack the production of other hormones through prioritizing survival to the point that the other hormones get downregulated. So I'm looking at thyroid hormone, because if you cut off TSH, your thyroid stops making thyroid hormone. I'm looking at the sex steroid hormones, because if you cut down LH and FSH, your ovaries and your testes might stop making estrogen or testosterone or even progesterone. So I tend to use a factory as an analogy for what's going on. So if we think of these brain chemicals from here as orders to a factory, and the adrenal glands here as a factory that makes several different kinds of vehicles, for example. So on orders from the brain, the pituitary chemical ACTH gets upregulated and signals increased production of cortisol. So if cortisol is like trucks and the government orders a whole lot of trucks, the factory is no longer going to have excess capacity to make the convertibles, the station wagons, or even the sedans, even though they're important too. So those other orders might get canceled. So TSH, because having an active metabolism isn't as important to conserve energy in times of famine or illness. Growth hormone, because we can always grow later when we're not stressed. Gonadotropins, FSH and LH, like I mentioned, that's what makes your sex hormones work. And these slow down because reproduction is a waste of energy and would slow you down in a survival situation. So all these other hormones are getting knocked off the assembly line, so to speak, in favor of keeping the trucks coming or the cortisol coming. Eventually, even aldosterone, which is made also in the adrenals, it's not quite as critical as cortisol, but it is essential for survival. If this gets low enough, then people will get dizziness and fainting spells like the lady in our story. The sex steroid hormones are kind of unique because progesterone is a sex steroid hormone. And it's also an early assembly line product for all these other steroid hormones. So it becomes a supply chain issue. If we're using all of it up, then even if we have enough LH and FSH coming through, we don't have enough raw materials to make the sex steroid hormones. So they get slowed down or even stopped. And you've probably all heard about elite female athletes who stop having periods while they're training hard. Well, this is why. And there are lots of other downstream effects of having daily chronic elevations in cortisol that we're going to go over. So one of the effects of elevated cortisol is something called insulin resistance. And here is why it's so essential to proactively manage our stress responses, both mental and physical stress. So in addition to cutting off the other hormone production in the way that we just discussed before, there are direct downstream effects of chronic elevated cortisol on other hormones in other body system. So insulin resistance is the first one. And it's a slowdown in how our body cells, except for active working muscle, take in sugar. So the result is our blood sugar is elevated, allowing more to be available to our brain and to our working muscles so that we can fight or run. Except one, it's chronic, and two, because we're not actually running from danger or working our muscles in any meaningful way most of the time, all of that extra sugar is not needed by our muscles, so it gets packed on as fat, particularly visceral fat. And more on that in just a moment. But sex hormones decrease, as we said, and people don't realize the profound effect that losing these can have. Changes in your immune system, including increased incidence of cancer and infection because your immune system is not fighting them as much in favor of fighting inflammation. Also, increased susceptibility to allergies and autoimmune diseases, which are really just swapping one kind of inflammation for a more persistent and difficult kind. And about autoimmune and allergic disease, the meds that you get for either one of these is likely to complicate you keeping your medical if you don't lose it altogether. And of course, cancer and infections also make you ill and can put you on a worry for having to get a special issuance as well. So belly fat, because cortisol is anabolic, meaning it causes it to grow, but not for muscle, for belly fat, then you store up fat because winter is coming. And the more fat you have, the more likely you are to survive that winter. You're also more likely to have sleep apnea, heart disease, cancer, and a whole other host of problems as a result of having more fat or having obesity. And because our survival is threatened, thyroid production is lowered and function is also blocked in a different way. So this can result in a lowered metabolic set point that persists even after the stress is removed, and cause a long laundry list of symptoms. So thyroid is my number one favorite subject. But today I'm going to skip that in interest of time, and because we already have plenty of other ways that you can use your medical even without talking about thyroid. So the cancer and infections, like I mentioned, those go up because your immune system is really kind of offline and attacking yourself and making you have allergies instead. Indigestion. Indigestion is not as innocent as it seems because cortisol changes your microbiome. It removes the healthy bacteria. It makes you crave sugar. It turns on your hunger hormones. It slows or stops the production of serotonin, which is the feel-good hormone. And because 90% of your serotonin is made in your GI tract, if you don't have that, the result is going to be depression. And guess what else doesn't fly? Most antidepressants. Then high blood pressure, higher blood pressure because we need to fight, but chronic elevated blood pressure damages organs and blood vessels, and is a huge independent risk factor for dementia as well as heart attacks and strokes. And persistent cortisol levels also result in something called elevated sympathetic tone. This has nothing to do with sympathy. It refers to the two different and opposite parts of your involuntary nervous system, the sympathetic, and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic nervous system revs us up for fighting. It's your fight or flight, makes us vigilant for danger. Parasympathetic is the more relaxed part that helps our bodies digest food, heal, grow, reproduce, or do other non-survival tasks. So the sympathetic nervous system activates the part of our brain that looks for danger in our environment. And that's where those 5 survival emotions come from. Just because we can't see them doesn't mean the tiger isn't still out there. So we need to be vigilant. So elevated sympathetic tone results in hyperalertness, high blood pressure, anxiety, and difficulty sleeping, even when you're not consciously aware that there's any threat going on. So a modern example would be like how you don't sleep well when you know you have to get up at 4 a.m. to get to work, or when you just had a fight with your spouse. So this slide is about the sex hormones, and I'm not going to read this, but please notice the symptom overlap that we're getting here with all the other hormone systems. So men need estrogen and women need testosterone to feel really well. And aside from sexual performance, the overall result of losing these hormones is a loss of confidence, a loss of vitality and performance ability, and heart disease, stroke, depression, bone loss, and obstructive sleep apnea. And most of these will also cost you your medical if you get them. And, supplementing these hormones is not really the complete answer, although it can definitely help because your body is smart and it'll break them down to maintain the balance it thinks you need to survive all the stress if you don't take care of the stress. Also, remember, progesterone, if it gets used up making lots and lots of cortisol, then you're going to completely run out of that and then be unable to make adequate amounts of any of the other steroid hormones or even enough cortisol eventually. And that's bad. That's very bad. And I left this one for last because it is the most important one. So insulin resistance means that our muscle cells can take up 60% less of the carbs and glucose we consume as long as we're not active. And as blood sugar levels go up, so do insulin levels. So long before we end up with diabetes and elevated fasting blood sugars down here, we're packing in the extra sugar as fat in our muscle cells, in our livers, in our organs, and high insulin demand and excess fatty infiltration in your pancreas eventually trigger it to not be able to make enough insulin. And that's when you get diabetes. And of course, diabetes is pretty hard to keep your medical. But most of these problems that are being directly caused by the high insulin levels are being directly stimulated long before you even get to diabetes. So obesity is the number one risk factor for sleep apnea, heart disease, hypertension, and then high insulin feeds back to raise your cortisol up even more. Oh boy. Okay. I'm sorry. That's way more than three ways when you add them all up. But really, high cortisol, high insulin, low thyroid, and low sex hormones are the end result of stress if you don't manage it. So, when do these symptoms typically show up? Well, mid 30s, really. And people who end up with the severe consequences in their later years can often pinpoint and go back and see telltale symptoms as far back as their early 30s. For women, sometimes things stay pretty much under control until they start approaching perimenopause, and then the loss of estrogen starts promoting insulin resistance too, and then all of these issues start to emerge. Now, I am a big proponent of hormone replacement in perimenopause and menopause, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the measures that I'm going to talk about are not necessary. So, what are we looking for here? We're looking for cravings, mood changes, bowel problems, dry skin, hair loss, fatigue, exercise intolerance, acne on your back and arms, sensitive teeth or receding gums, weight gain, especially in the belly area. All of these are symptoms of elevated insulin before your blood sugar goes up. And it is never too late to stop taking better care of yourself. So, the story that I started at the beginning is about me, of course. It was years later, after I was out in private practice, that I finally figured out that this scenario is pretty common, but actually not normal. And I had been experiencing the physical effects of chronic stress combined with depressed thyroid function. And these go hand in hand for a lot of women, especially. So I learned about some specific treatments that I hadn't encountered before. And when I decided to try it, my results were really fantastic. I could make it through the day without relying on coffee. My mind was sharp. I could sleep through the night, wake up without an alarm. I rarely got sick anymore, and I was able to conceive and have a baby quite late in life after thinking I would never be able to. And I finished my private pilot certificate. It took a long time, but I finally did it, despite having a special issuance for thyroid medication. So it took me a lot of investigating to come up with the answers. And mostly I had to find them on my own. And of course, this is not the end of the story. I am still a high stress person. I have still been dealing with menopause and hormone loss since I got into my 50s and hormone replacement. And I've had an ongoing struggle with sleep problems, including now a diagnosis of sleep apnea and having to get another special issuance. So, my own health needs were really the first drivers of my current practice specialization. And that drive has really continued as I spend several hours each week staying on top of the current developments in hormone care, which is a luxury that a lot of physicians do not have. I also have the luxury of time to spend helping people who have complex hormone related complaints or who just have the desire to optimize their health rather than just chase it with more prescriptions. Anyway, the best news that I have for you today is that all of these things that we just talked about are reversible and it is never too late to get started. So these four pillars of health that I'm going to talk about are not only foundational for healthy living, but are completely controllable by you without drugs for the most part, and for the most part without a doctor's care, even if you're already showing signs of stress and diet-related metabolic illness. So, of course, short of selling up and going to live in a monastery, there's not always a ton that can be done about your circumstances, but there's a lot that can be done out there about your mindset, your thoughts about your circumstances. So, self care and stress reduction. And I'm not talking about a shopping spree or a spa day when I talk about self care. I am talking about daily practices that help you reduce your physical reactions to stress. So there are authors that I like. Martha Beck is one, Michael Hyatt is another one, and they both write about mindset and deliberate thinking about how to make yourself happier and less stressed. And most of the techniques in the mindset work by downregulating that sympathetic tone that I was talking about and activating your parasympathetic, which lowers your cortisol, increases your serotonin, and just generally makes you feel better. So, meditation, breath work, and biofeedback are three techniques that come to mind. But there's also the practice of metacognition, and this is the deliberate examination of our thoughts to look for fallacies and for mindset practices as a way to improve our thoughts and outlook on any situation that we happen to be in. This helps reduce the frequency and intensity of those five survival emotions and replace them with the ones that tend to release the healthier hormones, the dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin. And these practices are things like journaling and intention meditation and self coaching. So the next pillar is nutrition. So deficiencies, yes. And I do deal with that a lot in my practice, but excesses in particular are the modern challenge when we need to control and minimize the effects of insulin on our health. Movement. So there are so many ways that exercise is helpful. Strength training and a particular type of cardio called zone 2 are particularly helpful at prolonging lifespan and preventing an enormous variety of disease. All right, the fourth pillar is hormone supplementation. And this is really only part of the answer for most people and something you probably will need a physician to help you with, somebody who is specifically trained to manage a variety of hormone issues, including the sex hormones, because as you saw, they all influence each other. And finally, sleep. And sleep isn't even a pillar, it is really the foundation on which all the others rest. And for many of us, it is particularly particularly a challenge. So now I want to look at a few mistaken beliefs that people have around their health and what research actually shows. So I'm sure we've all heard this when we were young, right? As if it's somehow badass to do something that will shorten your life, reduce your performance ability, reduce your health and your attractiveness. And you probably know someone, or maybe you are one of these people who think that you're doing fine on 6 hours a night or less. And let me tell you, it is not fine. I love to pick on pilots about this, particularly because of the disastrous nature of being sleep deprived while flying or driving. How about this myth? I'll make it up on my days off. Also a no, because there is no sleep bank. We never come close to making up lost sleep, although 60% of adults admit to binge sleeping on their off days. We ignore adequate and regular sleep at our peril. Completely aside from the absolute devastation that short sleeping can have on your decision-making capacity and your reaction time, studies of cabin crew who frequently fly long-haul routes with time zone travel and have little chance to recover show that parts of their brains related to learning and memory have actually physically shrunk, suggesting biological destruction of their brain cells. So these same folks have significantly impaired short-term memory and are considerably more forgetful than their comparable counterparts. And if it isn't hard enough to get adequate sleep when you get to sleep at home each night, the repeated noise, the blue light at inappropriate times, the inappropriate temperatures, and uncomfortable hotel mattresses may cause repeated awakenings in people who travel for a living. So this one is really worth a heroic effort. And particularly for me, because short sleep is also now shown to be directly causative in accelerating Alzheimer's disease, to name one more deadly, not to mention disqualifying condition. So many studies do show that we need 7 to 8 hours of sleep as a matter of fact, almost all of them, um, to perform at optimal levels. So that's 8 to 9 hours in bed. And if you're not doing this, you're throwing away, a lot of the benefit from all your exercise and healthy eating and mindfulness, because short sleep all by itself raises sympathetic tone and cortisol. It's a physical thing that happens in your bodies. So some tips that can help are, first of all, plan to sleep whenever possible at the same time each night. Schedule your sleep. Every one of you has one of these amazing trackers in your pocket. Use it. Set alarms for everything. When to turn off the TV, when to turn out the lights. Also, recorded sleep meditation. So this amazing hack has helped me fall back asleep hundreds of times now when I otherwise would have been wide awake with my mind going in circles. It's called non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, and I have a link on my website to the program that I use for this in the courses section. So control your sleep environment. A cool, dark, quiet environment helps remove disruptions to quality sleep. A weighted blanket may also be helpful. And when you're traveling, earplugs, light blocking eye masks, and set that thermostat down below 68. That can really help when you travel. And for my patients, I also recommend some particular supplements for time zone travel. Here's one more myth, one final myth. That older adults needs less sleep is a myth. That adults are less able to generate adequate sleep is a fact. And much of it is related to hormone deficiencies and gets worse the longer you go without them. So here are some habits to avoid if you're consistently having trouble getting your 8 hours, having problems staying asleep, or if you're still tired after 8 hours of sleep. Avoid heavy meals close to bedtime. Eat your bigger meal in the middle of the day whenever possible. And if you notice you're waking up sweating in the night, try avoiding carbs and especially sweets at that later meal. Avoid screens during the last few hours of your evening, especially within 1 to 2 hours of when you have scheduled to sleep, because blue light shuts down melatonin. Have a conversation or read a book. The FARs are a really great one, sure to help you fall asleep, unless you're my husband, of course. Don't use alcohol to unwind or make yourself sleepy. Alcohol disturbs the brain waves that are necessary for your sleep, particularly the REM sleep that we all need, and it also triggers hot flashes. Sleeping pills, even over the counter, these are addictive and they don't actually help you get to sleep. And they are really more like a chemical baseball bat to your head. So you're unconscious, but you're not actually having any brainwave pattern that resembles normal sleep. And of course, they are not approved by the FAA at all. No caffeine after 10 a.m. So caffeine has a 12-hour half-life and is responsible for disrupting sleep quality or even waking you up in the middle of the night if it remains in your system, even after you fall asleep fine. And then don't drink a lot of water right before bed. It should be obvious why this one's important. Do drink during the day because flying causes dehydration. Dehydration causes headaches, cramping, or other nagging aches that can prevent quality sleep. Don't get up at 5 a.m. to work out unless you're willing to go to bed early so that you can be asleep by 9 p.m. And that's only if you don't wake up in the night. This is a huge mistake because short sleep makes you crave carbs and sugar, makes you overeat, make poor food choices, burn less fat, exercise less efficiently, and it destroys your mood and your ability to concentrate and perform well under pressure, among many other long-term negative outcomes. There's an entire hour-long talk about sleep on my website if you can stay that awake that long sometime. So the next myth is this one. We've all seen this, right? Some people, including many nutritionists and medical institutions, still preach calorie restriction, but this is not so. What we eat actually matters way more. And there is one particular kind of calorie that can really derail all your health goals. research has finally shown that the culprit in weight gain and insulin resistance is actually fructose. And fructose is a particular kind of sugar molecule that's present in table sugar and many other sweeteners, as well as fruit. Even some of the non-nutritive sweeteners can be converted by your body into fructose. And while it doesn't directly raise blood sugar on a blood test, studies show that fructose has several uniquely devastating effects. First of all, it's converted mostly directly to fat in your liver. It also induces conversion of glucose to more fructose, which then turns into fat because your insulin level gets higher. It stimulates hunger because we crave and eat even more calories. It slows down our metabolism. It causes high blood pressure, especially when it's taken with a lot of salt load. It induces non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is now the most common cause of end-stage liver disease or cirrhosis. It also induces inflammatory visceral fat. It can induce leaky gut if it's present in high enough concentrations, and it also turns off the ability to burn fat for energy if you're exercising. So here's another one. You are what you eat. Also not true. What we eat absolutely matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it is definitely not true that a high-fat diet is what makes you fat. Good old Dr. Atkins is probably up in heaven laughing his ass off at us now as we finally realize that it's not fat that makes us fat. So processed carbs and sugary snacks contain mostly glucose and fructose in the form of starches, corn syrup, and table sugar. And without fiber and other nutrients to slow down the absorption of those carbs, blood glucose levels rise rapidly. And it triggers the release of large amounts of insulin. And if you have insulin resistance, the problem is even worse. But you can stop the effects of that in its tracks by avoiding foods that raise insulin. Almost anything that's ground to flour, in fact, has the potential to be spiking your blood sugar and your insulin. So if you're working on losing weight, it's really best to avoid anything that's made from flour or any liquid calories or sweetened beverages at all. And also avoid sugary sauces like barbecue, ketchup, teriyaki, sweet salad dressings, and then limit your starchy vegetables like rice and potatoes. So what do we eat instead? We're going to eat fat, healthy fat, of course. Protein, high fiber nuts, vegetables. So some fruit is okay in small quantities, but not all fruit is created equal. Or how about this one? The best way to lose weight is by cutting calories. Also wrong. Calorie restriction without changing your food choices leaves you hungry, which spikes your cortisol, which slows your metabolism down and lowers your likelihood of success if you're dieting because your primitive brain thinks it's a famine. Also, it's really cool to know exactly what you ought to eat and how much and what treats you can get away with without spiking your insulin. But truly, every person is different. There is no one size fits all diet or fasting plan that you can discover. So here's another one. Hard exercise burns more calories. So this is technically true. However, if you are exercising hard to burn calories, you're probably only burning sugar. If you go too slow, it doesn't do much of anything. If you go too fast, fat burning stops, and it frequently kicks you up into releasing cortisol, which does what? Spikes your blood sugar and starts you producing sugar from the proteins that you ate and breaking down your muscle. Or how about this one? If you're dieting, you shouldn't exercise. That's a new one I heard the other day. At all? Come on. So Unfortunately, this one actually has some basis in truth, really for the approximate same reason as hard exercise burns more calories is not true. The exercise that most people are doing when they're determined to lose weight is probably too intense to burn fat. And burning fat requires pure aerobic exercise. So the definition of zone 2 or aerobic conditioning is pretty technical, but it's often quite a bit lower intensity than people think. And it's steady and it's long. You cannot cheat it. So think about a pace that you can hold for an hour and be just barely out of breath. It's very individualized, but your blood sugar, again, can give you clues. If it starts to rise during exercise, you are not in zone 2. You've gone up beyond and you're into zone 3. So you're saying if I want to lose weight, I shouldn't exercise? That's the advice that many physicians who do tailored weight loss programs are giving these days. But I am not saying that exercise is not good, but you do need to choose the exact kind and intensity of exercise you do with specific goals in mind. Do you want aerobic efficiency and fat burning? Or do you want stability, strength, and explosive performance? All of these things are admirable, but they take very different kinds of exercises. The benefits of aerobic exercises are manyfold, and the data is clear because folks who are in the top 2% of aerobic conditioning are 5 times less likely to die in the next 10 years. And that statistic holds through the 70s, through your 70s. And even going from the lowest group to below averages is going to half your risk of dying in 10 years. So muscle that is working absorbs glucose without insulin. So movement after eating is a good thing. Movement before eating is also a good thing because that's when you can mobilize your fat stores and help you burn fat instead of sugar, but only at that very right intensity. The next kind of exercise I want to talk about is strength training, because the more muscle strength and mass you have, and the more active you are, the less insulin your body needs to make to get the blood sugar into your muscles. There are other benefits of exercise too, because doing strength training that requires balance, like free weights, for example, activates many parts of your brain and promotes the building of bone mass, reduces fall risk, and enhances longevity. Exercise has mental benefits too. Even something simple like walking in nature can really be made into one of these mindfulness practices that I was talking about by staying in the present and noticing and appreciating the surroundings, the breath in your body, the other sensations in your body. It can help improve your mood. Strenuous activity that requires coordination and intense focus attention also counts as mindfulness and reduce stress and helps your brain if you're learning something new. So things like yoga, tai chi, basketball, tennis, or dancing like ballroom dancing. So these exercises that are done in community decrease social isolation, I should say, and improve cooperation. They improve the release of serotonin and dopamine. And exercise also can give you a sense of accomplishment as the habit gets really established. So, like, I'm a person who works out. If you think that, that's a positive thought about you. So, nutrition and exercise are both things that you'll probably need to pursue on your own because your doctor, if you even do go to one regularly, probably doesn't have the time to spend to help you figure it out and doesn't think you'll do what she tells you anyway, even if she knows all this stuff. And you would be shocked how little of what I am telling you is taught to doctors in training. So, how do you know what the right diet and exercise is for you? So I want to share with you a fascinating tool that I recently started using in myself and my patients to figure out just this. So a continuous glucose monitor. What do you do if you're concerned about nutrition, or even if you just want to optimize your health so you can be vigorous and vital as long as possible? How do you decide what you should eat, how you should move? There's so much conflicting conflicting advice out there on the internet these days. And it seems like everybody wants to sell you a magic supplement or a workout or a diet plan or a coaching group for 5 easy payments of $999. Yeesh. Anyway, the truth is your body is unique and no one size fits all program helps everyone. So we found a tool that helps people know what their own bodies need and what kind of eating plan, exercise, and sleep and mindfulness is right for each of us. And that is a continuous glucose monitor. And that's a really great way to get all that data. And it's not that expensive. So it's about the cost of your daily Starbucks habit. And you can get individualized up to the minute real time data. So your blood sugar and how it varies is a great proxy for the overall health of your metabolism. Is it high all the time? Does it spike up and then crash? What time of the day and what events or meals precede those crashes? What is it when you get up in the morning? How does exercise that you're doing affect it? Does it go up or does it come down? What even is a CGM? So a continuous glucose monitoring system uses a small discrete sensor to monitor your blood sugar levels in real time. So it easily helps you track your blood sugar on your smartphone. They were originally created for diabetics, and they're also popular now among health conscious people who want an easy way to track their blood sugar. They are waterproof and painless to wear. My husband and I started using these and found it so useful and interesting when we tried it that I am now offering this to my patients. And I have opened up a live virtual program for anybody who wants to learn more about their metabolism. And in that group, we walk through a month-long personal experiment where we obtain, apply, and wear these clever devices to gain insights into our metabolism and our health, with a sprinkling of cutting-edge information from me, of course. So it's amazing how much easier it is to get back on track with your habits when you see exactly what's making a difference in real time. Okay, here is the last myth that I'm going to talk about today, because unfortunately, this is also not true. That if you're diabetic, if you're not diabetic, that you don't need to worry about your blood sugar, because 50% of people in the US are thought to have a genetic predisposition towards insulin resistance, even without the high cortisol or the other endocrine disruptions making it worse, like what we just talked about. So metabolic disease is the whole spectrum of conditions that are triggered by high insulin levels. The reason I got interested in this is because so many people with hypothyroid problems are also suffering without knowing from metabolic disease. In fact, most people who have insulin resistance are completely unaware that they have it until one day their doc finally says, "Oh, you have diabetes now." And by that time, it is much more difficult to resolve. So, what is insulin resistance? Well, it's a genetic adaptation that helped early humans survive as a species when food was uncertain. It's a way to ensure that we don't burn up all our stored energy as food gets scarce. And it makes sense that fructose makes this worse because fruit is naturally ripe in the fall and because winter is coming. Unfortunately, it also makes us very efficient at packing on pounds now that food is plentiful and more dense with calories, but actually more deficient in nutrients. And here's the thing. We're all at risk for this, as we have discussed, because having high stress and high cortisol levels can bring it about in anyone. Aging and hormone imbalances, menopause in particular, accelerate this process. And even those of us with the genetic tendency need not be slaves to it, because knowing the science and taking proper steps can help us downregulate many of the harmful effects. So these CGMs make that much easier to figure out, and the instant feedback that you get reinforces good food choices and highlights the bad. So I'm going to give you an example. So for example, I went to Whataburger one day and I got some French fries, and I ate them, and they were delicious. But I was wearing my CGM, and I watched my blood sugar spike way, way up. And I didn't think that I have any problem with insulin resistance, but I watched my blood sugar go way, way up. And as I have learned what to do, I figured out that if you eat protein first before you eat your carbs, it actually makes a big difference. So the next week, I went back to Whataburger and I got the grilled chicken sandwich. And I ate my grilled chicken without the bun with some ranch dressing, which is nicely low carb most of the time. And then I ate my French fries. And I didn't just eat the fries, I ate the chili cheesy fries. Oh my gosh, they were so delicious. And I got much less of a spike out of my blood pressure doing that than I did when I ate the French fries alone. So that's just a small example of one of the cool things that you can figure out when you're using a CGM. Now, that doesn't mean that French fries are a good thing to eat. It doesn't. But it makes it to where when I am just gonna have a cheat day, because I can't stand it, that I know what to do to make it less bad. So there are a bunch of lessons that we have talked about today, and the first one being that adequate and regular sleep habits are foundational for controlling your stress levels. Without quality sleep, many of the lifestyle changes that we try to put into place will have little effect. The next one is that we can be in control of how we react to what life throws at us. Changes in how we think actually do reduce our stress, and that is critical for maintaining health. Attention to proper diet and nutrition can completely reverse career and life quality destroying insulin related medical conditions before they get worse. Physical activity of the correct type and intensity is key for optimizing stress, metabolic health, and mindset. And a continuous glucose monitor is a fantastic tool for helping you optimize your metabolic health. All right, so hormone-related conditions that do not fit the conventional wisdom are actually the backbone of my practice, including Hashimoto's disease, fibromyalgia, menopausal or men's hormone loss. So if you have insulin resistance or one of these other conditions, or you know somebody who could benefit from the kind of information that I gave you guys here, there is lots more of this on my website and in my newsletter. So if you will sign up for my newsletter by using this QR code, it will give you more information about the next CGM collective group that I'm going to put together, or any of the other content that I produce. This will take you straight to the sign up page. And thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. And I hope to see you all again soon.